This planet is currently experiencing a climate crisis. With rising sea levels, increasing temperatures, and extreme weather becoming more common, there is damage being done to the Earth that may become irreversible if we don't act soon. This crisis is often attributed to society's reliance on fossil fuels, which when burnt release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This causes global warming and perpetuates climate change. Greenhouse gases are produced in many sectors such as manufacturing and energy. However, transport is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases globally. 26% of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK in 2021 were from the transport sector, which was more than any other industry. Vehicles on the road are the main culprit, with road transportation making up for 76.2% of transport emissions in the EU in 2021. This has led to support for electric vehicles as a more environmentally friendly means of road transport. With no emissions released whilst driving, they have been billed as the future of motoring and a potential solution to the climate crisis. In the US, it has been estimated that the average petrol car emits 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide every year, assuming it achieves 22.2 miles per gallon and travels 11,500 miles per year. Combustion vehicles are polluting and causing serious environmental and health issues across the world, with cars and vans making up 68% of road transport greenhouse gas emissions. These vehicles have been a target of manufacturers first, as HGVs and buses are less suited to electric power. There is a clear difference between the emissions of driving an EV and an internal combustion engine vehicle. In a journey with one passenger from Glasgow to London, 88 or 85 kilograms of CO2 and equivalents will be emitted by a petrol or diesel car respectively, compared with just 26 from an electric car. This is estimated using the UK energy mix. Therefore, journeys of this length will have different emissions depending on the percentage of renewable electricity used to charge the vehicle. Less economically developed countries tend to have a greater reliance on fossil fuels, meaning that gap between conventional cars and electric vehicles is likely to be smaller. This is what the media often reports about electric vehicles, which has stemmed the belief that electric vehicles are the best and/or only solution to sustainable road transport. Less widely reported are the lifetime emissions of electric vehicles, which include production emissions, greenhouse gases emitted during the gathering and refining of raw materials, and the environmental costs of recycling the vehicle. The difference between the lifetime emissions of an EV and a combustion vehicle is a lot closer than their usage emissions, and owners who do few miles or change cars regularly may not reduce their carbon footprint while switching to an EV. In this video, I will evaluate the environmental benefits and costs of electric vehicles. I've looked at the benefits and drawbacks of ownership, and the reason why some buyers are wary to switch, and the alternatives to EVs. If you enjoy, please like and subscribe, as a lot of research went into making this video. There are many benefits to electric vehicles, both financially and environmentally. For example, electric motors are 90 to 95% efficient, which is far better than combustion engines, which are less than 20%. This should, in theory, mean EV drivers spend less on fueling their vehicles than those with combustion ones. In New Zealand, a 40% EV transition is expected to lower annual transport costs by $923 million due to lower fueling costs. The radio program Sliced Bread also found that driving a Vauxhall e-Corsa was over 10p cheaper per mile than its petrol counterpart. Whilst this was using 2022 figures, it is still representative of the differences in the cost of charging an EV and refueling a petrol car. The show later found that using off-peak tariff rates, the financial break-even point, which is when the additional cost of the electric variant no longer exists, was found to be 50,000 miles. Since then, energy prices have fallen, so the number of miles may have fallen despite petrol prices also decreasing. Sliced Bread offered a realistic comparison of the cost differences during a fuel shortage or energy crisis, both of which happened recently. Therefore, if another crisis affected UK energy prices, EV drivers would still have lower refueling costs. However, as later shown, if the vehicle is charged at peak times or at public chargers, the break-even point is at a higher mileage. In conclusion, EVs can reduce financial costs across their lifetime, although in the short term they are more expensive. This will be reflected when the shortfalls of electric vehicles are discussed. However, I believe that longer term owners will benefit financially. However, as previously stated, EVs are not all positive. Whilst they appear to save money for buyers, there are still negatives such as ethical issues surrounding lithium-ion batteries and infrastructure still being in infancy. The problems with electric vehicles occur on a daily basis for owners. As EVs are still developing an emerging technology, the infrastructure supporting them is far behind what petrol or diesel drivers experience. Many EV drivers must install a costly wallbox charger, as charging at home is the cheapest and easiest method. However, those who do not have off-road parking have to charge at public charging stations, increasing the costs and requiring more time and effort. The biggest concern for many drivers is range anxiety. This is the fear that an electric vehicle will run out of charge during a journey, and this is because EVs have shorter ranges than petrol and diesel vehicles, as well as hybrids. However, these claimed ranges are often significantly higher than what can be achieved through real-world driving, especially in winter, as lithium-ion batteries are less efficient in cold conditions. What Car tested a range of electric vehicles in winter, and their distances covered range from 159 miles to 300 miles, and the differences between actual range and claim range varied from 21% to 37.9%. In summer, What Car found their tested EVs could drive 18% further on average than in winter, but the range will be worrying in colder countries. However, there is light at the end of the tunnel, as NIO recently drove their ET9 over 1,000 kilometers on one charge, and have implemented a battery swapping system to eliminate drivers having to wait long times to charge. There is a clear difference in cost between electric vehicles and their petrol and diesel counterparts as well. It was found that mass market EVs cost $16,000 more than their combustion equivalents in the US. Customers are being priced out of electric vehicles currently, with companies catering towards wealthier buyers. In the compact SUV segment, the biggest vehicle sector in the US car industry by volume, the average cost of ownership is only $287 more than an ICE equivalent across 5 years. When looking at a mass market compact electric SUV, the difference is over $9,000 or 18% more than the comparable option. This is why EVs make up just 6% of the mass market sector, but make up nearly half of the premium market for the same type of vehicle. The significantly higher prices for EVs, the more affordable end of the market, have definitely harmed the development of them for a mass market audience, as they are mainly used by more wealthy people or those with company cars. Nearly a third of consumers in Greece said they would pay 6 to 10% extra for an electric vehicle with the same features, although less than 15% said that they would pay 16 to 20% extra, which would put many EVs out of budget for consumers, using the figures shown already. The figures for the break-even point financially to recover the additional costs of an EV over its combustion counterpart paint a similar picture. Sliced Bread found that the point was 80,000 miles, and they updated this when the price of electricity rose to 87,000. Whilst this was calculated with higher energy costs in the UK than now, petrol and diesel prices were also significantly higher. This provides a good estimate of the break-even point and demonstrates that EVs don't save as much as people think. Adding to the theme of financial problems, the residual values of EVs has fallen recently due to concerns about the cost of replacing batteries after warranty periods end. This has led to massive depreciation, particularly in luxury vehicles, which are still the most popular EVs. Used car dealers are also wary to purchase these vehicles, and combined with lower values, this could put off potential buyers. Another problem with electric vehicles is that they aren't popular in developing or poorer countries due to the higher prices of them, lack of infrastructure, and long distances between major towns and cities. They've sold poorly, and many manufacturers have not yet begun selling electric vehicles in these markets. Countries like India have seen poor sales, and 95% of all EVs were sold in 10 countries, being China, the USA, Japan, Canada, Norway, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden. This suggests EVs aren't best suited to countries with little current infrastructure and lower average incomes. There are also questions about if the electricity grid will be able to supply the electricity needed to charge EVs. There will be increased strain on the grid, and it's been suggested that not everyone will be able to charge their vehicles simultaneously, and there will instead be a staggered system. In New Zealand, it is estimated that only a 16% EV transition can occur without needing to increase electricity demand. This is with concentrated charging, where lots of people charge at the same time. Optimistic charging could support a 43% transition, and the same report suggested that the 40% transition planned may need demand-side management for charging. The study found that a grid expansion of mixed renewables would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 10%, and that combining this with an EV expansion would see the figure rise to 17 to 18%. However, an EV transition with a non-renewable grid expansion would only reduce emissions by 2%, further adding to the theory that changing the energy grid to more environmentally friendly fuels will be more beneficial than just switching to EVs. I'll quickly discuss the environmental credentials of electric vehicles, as it's not as clear-cut as you may think. If you want a more in-depth breakdown of how environmental EVs are, I'll leave a link to a video I did recently on this topic. In the long run, electric vehicles are better for the planet, with lower lifetime emissions and other factors, such as less noise pollution, and helping to provide cleaner air, which could help busy cities become much nicer places to live. Volvo did a groundbreaking study into comparing the C40 Recharge to the combustion XC40. They found the break-even point for emissions was between 49,000 kilometers and 110,000 kilometers, depending on the electricity used. This is because EVs have significantly higher production emissions due to the lithium-ion batteries used, so lesser emissions in the use phase means that these emissions will be clawed back over time. However, the emissions obviously depend heavily on the type of electricity used. This is less of a problem in the UK and EU, where the energy mix has a decent proportion of renewable energy, but could pose a problem in countries like China and India, which are still heavily reliant on fossil fuels for their electricity. This means it's predicted that vehicle carbon emissions in China will rise by 54.2% by 2035, despite 50% of all vehicles being electric. This was also calculated across 26 major countries, and emissions would rise across those too, despite over 40% of cars being electric. Globally, vehicle emissions will continue rising until 2035, despite 50% of all vehicles being electric, so it's not a short-term fix. If EVs weren't around, the increase in emissions would likely be greater, but EVs can't fully fix the pollution problem in the short run. Therefore, there needs to be widespread change to our energy sources in combination with EVs, otherwise they're unlikely to succeed. After all that, how green are they? Well, if you own one for over 5 years, you'll probably have reduced your own emissions, but shorter than that, and it may have been more environmentally friendly to drive a fuel-efficient petrol or a hybrid. Looking at the bigger picture, they aren't a solution for the next decade, although it's likely that almost all new vehicles will be electric after 2035, unless other zero-emissions technologies are viable, which currently looks unlikely. EVs often overshadow other sustainable transportation technologies, as they are the most prevalent low or zero emissions vehicles. However, as previously shown, EVs have their pitfalls, and there may be more sustainable and/or practical alternatives. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, also known as FCVs, have been touted as another solution to the problem of polluting transport. With zero emissions whilst driving, they offer similar benefits environmentally during the usage phase when compared with an EV, and when compared with combustion engine vehicles, they reduce lifetime emissions by 60%, which is similar to an EV using conventional electricity. Fuel cell vehicles may be even more sustainable in countries with greater dependence on fossil fuels for electricity generation. In Algeria, hydrogen will use the least energy from production, processing and use, using 30 megajoules less energy than EVs. In Morocco, it will need the same amount of energy as EVs, and in both countries is the most sustainable fuel. Whilst it is more energy intensive in Tunisia than EVs, FCVs are still a sustainable option. These figures are forecasted for 2030, meaning that investment in hydrogen fueling stations will be beneficial to increase adoption and reduce vehicle emissions. Whilst they are environmentally suitable, they are less practical than EVs due to relative underinvestment. There are few hydrogen fueling stations in most countries, and this will put off potential buyers. Hydrogen vehicles also have relatively high lifetime emissions. Across its lifetime, a Toyota Mirai is estimated to emit 29.3 tons of carbon dioxide and equivalents, far higher than the EVs and hybrids included in the report. The production emissions of the Mirai are also 17% higher than a comparable combustion engine vehicle, the Volkswagen Passat. Therefore, hydrogen is not a viable source at present, but with greater investment into infrastructure and more manufacturers offering FCVs, it could be a practical option. The reduced emissions compared with EVs is encouraging, although consumers will be put off by the price and lack of choice, and they are impractical unless one of the few hydrogen refueling stations happens to be nearby. Another alternative to EVs could be hybrids. Combining a petrol or diesel engine with an electric motor, they are often seen as the most practical option right now for people wanting to reduce their carbon footprint, but also needing the practicality of a conventional combustion engine vehicle. Mild hybrids have also become more popular in recent years. Using a small electric motor alongside the engine, the motor can aid the engine when starting and recuperate energy when braking. This should improve efficiency, as on average, mild hybrid vehicles are 15% more efficient than comparable combustion engine vehicles. Plug-in hybrid vehicles, or PHEVs as they're known, have lower emissions when compared with a conventional vehicle and can be comparable to EVs in certain situations. Predicted to release only 25 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometre in 2030, they will be significantly less polluting than an average combustion vehicle, which is predicted to emit 127 grams per kilometre. When using renewable energy, they can reduce emissions by up to 73% across their lifetime when compared with a combustion vehicle. A Volkswagen Passat 1.4 TSI GTE or Mercedes-Benz C300DE can have lower lifetime emissions than a Tesla Model 3 if they use renewable energy and a Tesla is charged using conventional electricity mixers. When a comparable EV and plug-in hybrid are charged using the same electricity, the lifetime emissions will always be lower for the electric vehicle. However, like hydrogen vehicles and EVs, they have higher production emissions. The two aforementioned plug-in hybrids emit more CO2 in production, with the VW having 17% higher emissions than its purely petrol counterpart, and the Mercedes having 15% higher emissions. While these are likely to be cancelled out by the reduced usage emissions, it is important to recognise that plug-in hybrids also have significantly higher production emissions than combustion vehicles, as other electrified options do. Overall, hybrids offer a slightly cleaner driving experience, but fail to reduce emissions as much as other technologies. The prices of plug-in hybrids and wide range of options make them appealing to people who want to reduce their emissions but can't afford an EV or need range that an electric vehicle couldn't provide. Because of their emissions, they can't be considered the future of the motoring industry, or at least a sustainable one, but they make sense for many people who want the ease of driving on electric power, but the practicality of a petrol or diesel vehicle. Another potential alternative is LPG, which stands for liquefied petrol gas. A cheaper, less polluting, or more efficient fuel, most petrol and diesel vehicles can be converted to run on it. Many people have already converted their vehicles, and this could be a way to keep current cars on the roads with lower levels of pollution without needing the extra emissions from production of new cars. Even though 60% of global LPG comes from refineries, it has less carbon, making it less polluting. Whilst it isn't zero or low emissions, LPG could be a potential alternative to petrol and diesel in the next decade as a method to wean countries off more polluting fuels and coax them towards thinking about other means of refueling. Manufacturers of cars are already on board, with many major brands offering vehicles that can run on petrol or diesel as well as LPG. Due to a lack of awareness around the fuel and a low reduction in emissions, LPG is not a long-term solution. However, it could be useful in the short term to reduce emissions before a widespread transition to a more permanent sustainable fuel. A solution with lifetime emissions comparable to EVs is natural gas vehicles. Using natural gases in a way similar to petrol, they have lower emissions than a combustion engine vehicle. The Audi A4 40 g-tron produced 26.8 tonnes of carbon dioxide and equivalents when fueled with CNG, which is compressed natural gas, whereas when fueled with CBG, compressed biogas, it released just 4.3 tonnes, less than a Tesla Model 3 being charged with renewable energy. The report also claimed that fueling CNG vehicles with CBG reduced lifetime emissions by 65%, and that biogas vehicles reduce lifetime emissions by 81% when compared with a combustion vehicle. These are very impressive figures, but like hydrogen, there is a lack of infrastructure for them, and little choice, again, like hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Therefore, it isn't a suitable replacement for conventional vehicles, but those that drive them are significantly reducing their own carbon footprint in comparison with driving a petrol or diesel vehicle. Other fuel sources, like biofuels, have been available for years, but the cost of converting existing combustion vehicles is high, and the fuels aren't easily accessible. Synthetic fuels have also been seen as the best potential solution. Compatible with combustion engines without any modification needed, they use carbon extracted from the atmosphere, making them in theory carbon neutral. However, they only have an efficiency in production of around 50% due to the energy used during the process. Porsche has been open about the development of these fuels alongside major fuel and oil firms, and plan to produce 550 million litres of synthetic fuels by the end of the decade. Whilst this would only supply enough fuel to replace petrol for 2 weeks in the UK, there are other companies developing this technology, and the UK's reliance on petrol will likely fall due to increasing sales of EVs. However, with great investment, e-fuels could be the best solution, as like LPG, they could utilise the massive number of combustion vehicles still on the roads, and the need to produce so many new cars would fall, providing current vehicles are properly maintained. New combustion vehicles could be produced still, as they are less polluting at this stage than EVs. The EU also agreed to allowing new vehicles with combustion engines to be produced, providing they use a completely non-polluting synthetic fuel. This hints at the potential of synthetic fuels being mass market, and shows the idea of a zero emissions fuel with the same practicality as petrol or diesel is desirable. As shown, electric vehicles have many benefits and drawbacks. They provide cleaner transport and usually have lower running costs. However, the price and unsuitability in developing countries means it will take a long time for them to fully penetrate the market. This could leave time for another sustainable technology to become more practical, widespread and affordable. However, at this moment, no other fuel source exists that is better placed to provide a sustainable motoring industry. Whilst far from perfect, EVs are poised to become the major technology in the automotive sector, and their falling prices and the growing used market for EVs should ensure that they become even more popular, reduce emissions in the next decade, as well as EU and UK mandates on the share of zero emissions vehicles being produced each year, which rises annually until it gets to 100%, and the EVs are the only mainstream zero emissions vehicles currently on the market. However, with manufacturers like Mercedes-Benz and Toyota not being confident in electric vehicles, it suggests EVs aren't a long-term solution. Porsche's investment in e-fuels and the hesitance of major manufacturers to push on with EVs signifies a major step back in the development of them. While synthetic fuels are expensive and hard to produce, it seems they would be the favoured option of manufacturers, and hydrogen has often been touted as a better option by a few brands for a long time. Whilst they are not viable options at this point in time, investment in them, instead of more funding for development of EVs, could see them become credible rivals to electric vehicles. Slight declines in demand for EVs as the price decreases are slowing suggests that EVs won't become truly mass market until more cheap electric vehicles enter the market, such as offerings from Chinese brands such as BYD, as well as from established manufacturers such as Dacia, whose spring starts from just £14,995, and Tesla, Volkswagen and Renault, who all plan to bring out models priced at around £25,000. From a cost standpoint, perhaps within a business, the operational costs of the best mixed fleet can be 7% lower than any homogeneous fleet. Therefore, it may be best to have a mix of vehicles on the roads from a cost perspective, although EVs should reduce emissions in some countries, as shown previously. Therefore, I believe, on the basis of my research, that electric vehicles represent the short-term future of the car industry, offering the most compelling and practical method of zero or low emission transport. However, due to their problems in less developed countries and those that rely on fossil fuels, they aren't as sustainable as commonly thought. Therefore, in order to reduce emissions by the largest amount, a different fuel should be used to power future road transport. Method should replace electricity. Whilst it is hard to tell what fuel that should be, due to many still being in their infancy, a more practical and less polluting fuel should replace electricity for the benefit of the environment and the experiences of drivers worldwide.